So thank you for joining us today. My name is Spencer Bain. I am the treasurer of the BC CITE interior section. And today we have a technical presentation by Bunton Associates. So we're joined by Erin Tattrie and Tyler Thomson. Sorry, Erin, if I got that wrong, you might have to correct me after. So I'll just give a short bio of Bunton Associates and then Erin and Tyler before we start, and then I'll hand it over to them. They're going to do a presentation today, and then we'll have a bit of a question period if we have time after, and wrap up around 1. So founded in 1993, Bunton Associates Engineering Limited is one of the largest specialist transportation planning and engineering consulting companies in Western Canada. Their team is represented by over 50 of the finest transportation planners, engineers, and technologists and support staff located in Calgary, Edmonton, recently Kelowna, Vancouver, and Victoria. So that's Bunton Associates. I'll do a quick intro to Tyler Thomson. Tyler began his career with Bunton Associates in 2006, and today is an associate of the firm, providing leadership in the area of active transportation planning. Tyler is based in the Victoria office and also manages a team in the Vancouver office, where he previously spent 10 years working with the firm. Tyler is passionate about sustainable urban and rural transportation, including the promotion of sustainable and active travel modes, urban design, and innovative streetscape standards in order to improve both efficiency and enjoyment when moving through the urban environment. Tyler prides himself on being responsive, evolving transportation trends, and provides practical and innovative solutions. As both a devoted urban adventurer and explorer of the natural environment, Tyler enjoys spending much of his free time with his family, navigating both cities and nature, taking in the different social, architectural, environmental, and urban design elements that make places work. He stays active by chasing his 3 kids around, cycling to work when not working from home, and taking advantage of living close to many hiking trails on southern Vancouver Island. Okay, so that's Tyler. On to Erin. Erin's always had an interest in transportation. It began with Roman roads in university. Then it progressed to constructing roads, bridges, and overpasses as a Red Seal carpenter. Now Erin looks at transportation using roads and finding out ways to make it easier to move around. Erin joined Bunt in 2019 as a junior transportation technologist after completing her civil technologist diploma from British Columbia Institute of Technology. As a West Coast native, Erin enjoys camping and snowboarding. She is also often found playing various sports such as soccer, volleyball, beach volleyball, and curling. Occasionally, you may find her doing archery or learning kickboxing. Erin likes seeing all human-powered ways we can travel, including cycling, skateboarding, skiing, kayaking, etc. It can be for commuting or recreationally or for health. It's just beneficial to everyone when you can use active transportation, and I think we could probably all agree with that. So that's your guys' intro. I'll just hand it over to Erin and Tyler for their presentation. Erin, I'll make you the presenter here so you can show your PowerPoint.
That's great. Thanks very much, Spencer, for the introduction. I'm just going to hide myself here so I can just see the presentation. We're going to be, all of us as a group here, a bit of guinea pigs as we test out this inaugural run of this kind of emerging but important topic on rural and regional active transportation. So as Spencer mentioned, I'm an associate and senior transportation planner with over 15 years of experience at Bunt, based out of the Victoria office. I'm joined today by Erin, who is a transportation technologist recently located to Kelowna. I think what I wanted to say was Erin may have the most unique set of qualifications that I've seen in the transportation sector, complete with a Red Seal certification in carpentry and also as a GradTECH. So needless to say, Erin always approaches transportation issues with practical and measured solutions, but from a bit of a different grounding. So before we get on with the presentation, just a very brief summary of my commute history to work over the past 15 years and why I'm so interested in talking about active transportation. I spent my first 9 years at Bunt commuting about 6,000 kilometers within downtown Vancouver as a pedestrian. And the next 2 years I spent with a combination of transit and cycling from the North Shore to downtown. And then the last 5 years, I commuted over 20,000 kilometers by bike and e-bike from the West Shore of Greater Victoria to downtown Victoria, though most of the last 2 years plus was spent commuting from the upstairs to the downstairs of my home. Next slide, Erin, please. So just before we get on with the presentation, it's particularly important to acknowledge the traditional lands that we live, work, and recreate on. We respectfully acknowledge that we reside and work on the traditional territory of the Syilx, Antlakapam, and Secwepemc peoples, while I personally live and work in Langford and Victoria, which are located on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish, specifically Esquimalt, Songhees, Chianu, and Wasatch peoples. Next slide, please. So a bit of an outline for what we're going to be going through today. Just we'll start off easy, just defining what is active transportation and what are the benefits of active transportation, which I think most of us are familiar with anyways. We'll get a little bit more serious and talk about what are the kind of differences between urban and rural active transportation and what that means with examples in the rural and regional context. We'll briefly go over 2 case studies of some work that we've done and are continuing to work on. And then if we have time, we'll go through the emerging best practices of active transportation and design. The presentation itself will be, I think, available for download afterwards. So the kind of more technical information contained at the back end will be available to review later, and hopefully to leave enough time for some valuable discussion. So the definition on what is considered active transportation is constantly evolving alongside the rapidly evolving innovations in personal mobility. However, we define it as any form of human-powered or partially human-powered transportation. It is often synonymous with cycling and walking. However, there are many forms of active transportation such as skateboarding, inline skating, wheeling, mobility scooters, or other aids, as long as what you use makes you active and gets you on the go. Changes in technologies have introduced other forms of transportation beyond solely human-powered modes, such as the recent growth in pedal assist or fully electric bicycles and other mobility assistance devices called micromobility. Next slide. Some of the benefits of active transportation that we always talk about are the obvious ones. There's health benefits, making sure that everybody gets physically active and using our bodies the way they were intended. There's environmental benefits, reducing greenhouse gases and making sure that people are able to reduce their vehicle trips. Safety, as well as making sure that the environment for people to move about is safe and result in lower vehicle speeds and getting, again, help for more vulnerable road users. There's societal benefits and, of course, economic benefits as well, especially with the gas prices we've got going these days. And next slide, please, Erin. So setting the stage, why do we want to talk about rural active transportation? This was an interesting slide to kind of put together. What I was aiming for was understanding the population versus the land area coverage. And what I found was about 12% of BC's population is considered rural, which is about the same population as the city of Vancouver. But that population is spread out, of course, across the entire province from as far south as Metchosin on the southern tip of Vancouver Island up to Fort Nelson, the northeast corner, and of course everything in between. Urban land represents less than 0.5% of the total land area, but with 88% of the population, it's typically where you find active transportation infrastructure. Another interesting fact was that a whopping 90% of BC is owned by the province in crown lands, which includes BC parks, and over 75% of BC's land is considered mountainous terrain, which also makes it a bit more interesting in terms of getting people out and being active. The agricultural land reserve is about 0.5% of the overall land. And so, in summary, the populated rural area is still to be determined. But essentially, the story is that rural BC makes up a reasonably significant chunk of the population and proportionally takes up more land than urban areas. But it's composed of many more unincorporated areas, villages, and towns than the urban counterparts. And these areas are spread all the way across the province, which makes for more challenging to justify spending on active transportation infrastructure in these rural communities. Next slide, please. So what is BC doing for active transportation? The last few years, there's been quite an impetus towards actually trying to implement active transportation through the form of grant programs. There's the Active Transportation Network Planning Grant, which is available to communities to actually develop an active transportation plan for the community. And then beyond that, there's the Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant, which helps support the construction and funding for actually building projects that are contained within plans. And it covers everything from walking, cycling, rolling, winter-focused facilities, water-focused, and other emerging modes as are kind of sensible. And the infrastructure grants do fund things such as multi-use protected travel lanes, pedestrian cycling safety improvements, end-of-trip facilities, and lighting and wayfinding signage. Sorry, just back one more point on that one, Erin, was for small communities that don't have the resources of their own, BC also developed the BC Active Transportation Design Guide, which just as we were starting up here, we were talking about it being just an excellent resource to take in the BC context and for small communities to have as a resource guide in trying to develop active transportation infrastructure. Next slide. Comparing the urban versus rural regional context, just to kind of make sense of things here, something that maybe most of us are familiar with is the city of Vancouver, and they've got an urban street grid with lots of kind of equally spaced facilities, connected facilities, both on slower moving traffic streets and on busier streets. They'll have separated facilities as well that are completely off-road, and these bike connections connect to just about anywhere and are continuously evolving. And that's something that you can really only get in kind of a more compact and urban environment where all these land uses are kind of contained together. In the middle here, we've got the CRVD, which is an area that we're currently doing active transportation plan for. Very longitudinal north to south. There are several electoral areas which are kind of considered, unincorporated. There's 4 municipalities. There's 10 First Nations groups that are peoples that are within this area as well, and lots of little villages in between. And as you can see, it would be a little bit difficult to create an efficient network here, but as you'll see later in the presentation, there's just some kind of emerging ideas that we are looking at for that one. And maybe something that's folks in the interior might be more familiar with would be in the city of Armstrong, which kind of includes urban, rural, and regional characteristics. It's a place I believe is actually just working on their active transportation plan now. But you get, some kind of a suburban or more compact environment in the center, some suburban areas outlying, and then surrounding the city of Armstrong are more rural connections through the region. So just some more points about how really the context differs for rural active transportation. Rural areas are largely large, sparsely populated areas, geographic areas. There are fewer main destinations to go across on longer distances, potentially less heavy traffic in the area, and they make people feel more comfortable strolling or cycling, or maybe not. If there's higher speeds, they're generally slow growing or depopulating in a lot of locations, and increased proportion of older adults. It's often more challenging to reach places of interest without a vehicle, with infrequent transit, poor pedestrian and cycling network connectivity. Also generally more recreation-based than commuter-based. And there's economic constraints, again, as I was speaking to, with fewer people in a larger area. It's more difficult to secure funds for new transportation initiatives over those kind of day-to-day priorities. And then there are typically not as many formal facilities, but paved shoulders along highways or high-speed railroads, which can be quieter alternative routes, but also they often do not exist. Next. This is just showing, some different types of rural and regional trail routes. The Tofino-Ucluelet off-road trail was, I think, is actually partially still under construction, but a lot of it has been finished and completed, connecting between Tofino and Ucluelet. And this is just a local business that has prepared kind of a more creative way of understanding what the distances are, how long it might take to get between places, which are considered key destinations. And this is along a highway, so it's a linear kind of alignment. The Kettle Valley Rail Trail is one that, again, in the interior you're familiar with, connecting between Merritt in the northwest down to Grand Forks in the southeast, and occupying the alignment of an old rail line. And then something maybe a little bit different is in Fort Hardy, where showing the future network here, they're trying to make connections both off street and on street, connecting a more rural part of the community to the urban center. Some of the types of infrastructure for active transportation, not necessarily just for rural context. We've got waterfront multi-use pathways, general multi-use pathways, bi-directional pathways or bike lanes, unidirectional bike lanes, sidewalks, of course, wayfinding signage to help people know where they're going, trails along old rail lines. There's shared roads and, again, paved shoulders. That's not all of the types of facilities, but just some to start thinking about. And recently, I guess this is going back to last fall when we did our kind of detective work in the Cowichan Valley. There were some really good examples of the rural context and what kind of challenges are being faced. On the left, you can see we've got steep roads that are curving, and people want to use them because they're going to places they want to go, but there's not formal facilities. But you can see, very steep, 15% grade, and the cyclist is choosing to take advantage of the full width of the road, which might offend some drivers, but the speed limit is 30, so they're probably doubling that anyways, going down that grade. People are also getting quite creative with their pedestrian connections to transit facilities in rural areas. Again, you've got just an informal pullout on the side of a rural roadway with a shoulder, and they've took to their own devices and brought chairs because the funding doesn't even exist for putting benches there because they're not used as frequently and not as high dense of an area, obviously, but still a clever way to address that locally. On the right-hand side, also in a rural area, you've got to think about horses. You've got a narrow shoulder here, and there's farms around the area. You need to make sure that you're watching for horses, both for drivers and cyclists and pedestrians, so that everybody can coexist. The next slide, please. The other thing with the rural context is there's everything has been so kind of car or vehicle dominated for so long that a lot of the pedestrian and cycling kind of infrastructure are afterthoughts. These connections are kind of cumbersome and difficult to navigate, and generally unsafe. So things that need to be addressed when doing active transportation planning in rural context. Next one. Slide on the left here does show a good example of a multi-use path. Again, it's quite a steep section headed towards the village, but it's a good example of how it's away from the road, at least for safety. On the right-hand side, there's difficulties often, again, with these rail lines that, you know, they're not always in use. Some of them, like this one here, are actually currently not in use, but how they interact with pedestrian connections and vehicles can be a challenge. From a couple of years ago, we took some photos up in Port Hardy, and you know, similarly, you know, the maintenance of any kind of facilities is also important, and it's often overlooked. Things are overgrown, maybe less inviting, a little less formal, and wow, look at all that space for the vehicles, and I don't see a single one on that road. I think I was able to take that photo right from the center of the road. So maybe, you know, thinking about reallocating space for active modes. Again here, so when facilities aren't formally provided or aren't provided in a meaningful and practical way, people find their own way to get where they need to go. And Port Hardy is committed to improving the active transportation experience in its community for the betterment of everyone who lives there. But people, when they want to get somewhere, they find the path of least resistance, and that's kind of you know, what's shown with the facilities that are there maybe weren't intended for those uses, but that's how they want to be used. And so they need to be thought of in a different way to make sure that they're incorporated safely. So we'll go through again just some of the context here for the District of Port Hardy Active Transportation Plan, which has been completed just last year, and then the Cowichan Valley Regional District Active Transportation Plan, which is still a plan that's in progress. Next slide, please. So just a brief overview here. The challenges that we've had to discuss are funding, costs, resources, public support and perception, environmental and seasonal variation, jurisdiction coordination, and the land uses and existing conditions. Those are not unique to any particular area. Those are the challenges that we've seen in many communities that we've been working in. And then looking at some of the built and proposed features, walking facilities, cycling, including for all ages and abilities, making sure that they're safe and making sure that there's good wayfinding and navigability amongst the facilities. So a bit of a community profile here about Port Hardy. It's located with the traditional territory of the Kwaikutl First Nations on the northern tip of Vancouver Island. It's also home to the Quetzino and Guasala Naquita First Nation bands. It's the largest community within the regional district of Mount Waddington. The median age is 43. Population is just under 4,000 people. It serves as the gateway to the Central Coast, Cape Scott, and North Coast trails, and is the sister city of Numata, Japan. So the Port Hardy Active Transportation Plan addresses the needs and requirements of the broadest range of potential users. The plan is a living and ever-evolving document that's intended to provide direction for initial actions and a framework for guiding future initiatives. Next slide. Goals and objectives included enhancing public safety, encourage a healthy lifestyle, encourage and facilitate clean energy transportation options, enhance the tourism benefits, Again, the challenges and opportunities are both to do with poor infrastructure and traffic conditions, lack of network connections and long distance to travel, as well as wayfinding, challenges with weather and maintenance in that kind of northern coastal climate, accommodating for people with mobility issues, and then as well making sure the consideration of societal conditions is also accounted for. Next steps are to implement the best practice and policies, execute the funding strategies that were recommended, and ensure that we're employing the equitable and universal design approach, the network development through priority projects, and monitoring. The future network map here, maybe for those who aren't familiar, on the east side is the community of Fort Rupert, which is within the district of Port Hardy. It's where the airport is, and kind of the more rural and less densely populated areas. People do live in this area and want to commute and go to school and work in the main area in the center over to the west. So there was kind of informal facilities that had been started by outside communities like the Rotary Club or the mountain biking club that now the district wants to make sure are becoming more formalized and making sure that people are able to safely get between the kind of rural areas and the more urban areas of Port Hardy. One other kind of interesting thing before the next slide is that they were able to obtain one of the earlier communities to obtain grant funding from the province, which is being put towards their some of their priority projects that were identified. The next slide, please. So the CVRD is located on, sorry, that's for Cowichan Valley Regional District. It's located on the traditional territorial lands of 10 First Nations communities, which extend beyond the regional boundaries. It's one of 27 regional districts in BC. It's got an expansive area with a total of 9 electoral areas, 4 municipalities, including the town of Ladysmith, municipality of North Cowichan, the town of Lake Cowichan, and city of Duncan. There are over 200 community parks, 11 provincial parks, 8 regional parks, and 2 regional trails within the CVRD. The median age in the CVRD is 51. It's quite a bit higher than in Port Hardy. It's a good indication of it being more of a retirement community, and the population is just under 90,000. Next slide. So the CVRD's active transportation plan strives to integrate existing, ongoing, and future transportation plans, policies, and strategies throughout the region while bridging the gaps of the existing network for a complete and connected regional network for all ages and abilities. So the process involves all interested parties, including the public, invested stakeholder groups, and First Nations communities in a collaborative process. We talked a little bit about this one earlier. So the existing network is primarily comprised of the Cowichan Valley Trail, which is a hard-packed gravel multi-use path extending through several parts of the CVRD with connections to the Souk Hills Wilderness Trail and the neighboring CRD on the south end, as well as to the Great Trail in the regional district of Nanaimo to the north. And while it's not entirely clear on the existing network map, there's a few critical gaps that remain to be completed to help create a cohesive and connected network. Other local connections and secondary connections are needed to enhance the overall accessibility as well. It covers such a large area of rural, forested, mountainous area with a number of small villages and urban centers. And so creating those connections between these communities is both a key challenge and an opportunity in the CVRD. Next slide. So some of the goals and objectives are to create or enhance connections between outer village centers and the urban hub of Duncan. Be conscious of emerging technologies and how to incorporate them, such as e-bikes. Enable and promote equitable, accessible, and inclusive mobility options. Increase public health and safety while being fiscally responsible. and strengthening the relations and community bonding with all residents, First Nations, community stakeholder groups, and then developing a framework for regional cooperation between the communities, which is something that's a bit absent at the moment. Next slide. So the challenges that they're currently reviewing are substandard shoulders on key regional roadways. The MOTI is the authority for roadways in electoral areas, which means that traffic calming on roads is a challenge due to maintenance. Shoulder widening can sometimes lead to higher vehicle speeds as well. So it's a bit of a push-pull on that one. Funding streams required to pay for regional active transportation projects must go beyond the gas tax. Opportunities that are emerging, the Cowichan Valley Trail has potential to provide a valuable, high-quality network spine, again, with its kind of linear pattern of development. The preference certainly is not just for the regional district, but in general practice for separated multi-use paths where possible. MOTI is open to shoulder widening though, and we have had conversations with them. They do feel that they can make that work with their current maintenance practices. So it's a bit of a win because dealing with the MOTI is going to be ongoing, not only in the regional district, but in other rural areas in BC as well. So the next steps for this project are currently in progress with the phase 2 public engagement actually happening this weekend and planned finalization. From this, we're also starting to develop a design toolkit, which, as alluded to earlier, does rely on the BC Active Transportation Design Guide, designing for off-street pathways where possible, as mentioned, wide shoulders with better visibility and partial separation with rumble strips to keep cars from driving on the shoulder unnecessarily, including for complete streets and village centers and more areas, urban areas in the region, and making sure that there's a more legible, intuitive regulatory and wayfinding signage program. So next slide, please. What are some of the early lessons? The keys to success for regional and rural active transportation is connecting communities. Active transportation focused on creating better connections within and between communities and to key destinations provides opportunities for those who do not drive, often including the most vulnerable people in society, such as children, people with lower incomes, people with mobility issues, and older adults to become mobile and more active and get where they want to go. Connected active transportation networks increase mobility and access within the community, helping facilitate access to jobs, schools, healthcare, and community facilities. So creating meaningful and practical connections that are safe, comfortable, enjoyable, and navigable for all ages and abilities is key. If we can connect communities, we can foster stronger community bonds, leading to a healthier and happier society, and hopefully fewer cars as well. And we wanted to share also just some of the good design practices that we've come across. Again, there's a lot of information to take in here, and I'm not going to cover everything in detail. The slides will be available afterwards for anyone who wants to take a closer look. But in general, again, this is not just for rural areas or regional context, but for anywhere. The preference would be for physically separated facilities for all ages and abilities, which can include multi-use paths, side paths, sidewalks, and separated bike lanes, unidirectional or bidirectional. The measures here, dimensions are starting with the minimum to preferred widths or indicating wider in other locations where it makes sense or where possible. Next one, please. Then, was it, go back one? Yes, this one here, visually separated facilities. Those are things such as paved shoulders, which we talked about, so enhanced edge of roadways to serve for cyclists and pedestrians, depending where you are. Looking at a minimum of 1.2 and wider if possible, providing a buffer also gives that extra bit of kind of perceived safety. Rumble strips I talked about earlier are an interesting one. They can sometimes present an obstacle to cyclists, but certainly they do help prevent vehicles from kind of drifting into the shoulder space. So something that I think can be maybe dealt with having additional buffers between the rumble strip and the shoulder if possible. Bike lanes as well, everyone's familiar with the conventional painted or buffered bike lanes. Next slide, please. After visually separated facilities, we talk about mixed traffic facilities. That can include yield roadways, bicycle boulevards, and advisory shoulders, which again are often shared with traffic, but usually on lower volume, lower speed routes. Next slide, please. So how or what does it mean to be having a connected network? It's where you have cohesion that may span short distances to fill gaps or connect a broader network. There's directness of the routes and getting people to the places they want to go. Accessibility is key, making sure that everybody is able to get there, literally everybody, where possible. Making sure that there's primary routes, but also alternatives, which may have different types of facilities, and gives people a variety of options for how they'd like to travel by active modes. Safety and security is paramount, making sure that separation is there, but also including for lighting and other weather considerations at different times of year. And you want to make sure they're comfortable, legible, and enjoyable so that they actually get used. Next one, please. Old rail lines, again, there's lots of them through the province. Some of them might be getting reactivated, some of them might be getting shared with rail and trail, and some of them are just getting totally repurposed or converted to multi-use pathways. And the great thing is they often provide a long and continuous facility. However, rail wasn't necessarily always connected to all of the kind of destinations, maybe at the beginning and at the end, but in between there's lots of destinations that aren't necessarily directly connected. So making sure that there's branches that come off of these to get to all the places that are in between the beginning and end of the line. Next one, please. Signage is often forgotten, but is a critical part of making sure that the active facilities are legible and should be context sensitive. Caution and yield signs to warn pedestrians and cyclists on the roadway crossings with vehicles, and route signage. Understanding where you need to go and how to get there is helpful as well. Some of the resources, of course, are TAC references in the FHWA Small Towns and Rural Multimodal Network Guidelines, as well as the BC Active Transportation Design Guide that we've talked about. Where all of this would kind of mean nothing if nobody knew about it. So education programs and awareness is also very key. Safe routes to school programs, bicycle education and skills training in schools and outside of schools as well. Ensuring cycling and road safety courses are available for children and adults and older adults. Doing things like bike and walk pilot programs in different areas. And certainly in a lot of the province could be conducted in partnership with the ministry or with the municipalities. Next one. And then policies to make sure that you're able to secure funding and as well that plans are able to be implemented. So an interesting one that we came across was the federal government's Rural Transit Solutions Fund, which targets the development of transit solutions in rural and remote communities. And then as well, municipal and regional policies that reflect or include active transportation to actually get built. Next one. All right. Well, that brings us to the end here, and we did zoom through that, which is great. Hopefully, we didn't skip over anything not too important, but we've got about 19 or 20 minutes here to have some discussion. So I'm going to click back to my view everybody function, and then I don't know if folks have questions. It'd be great if we could, turn your camera on if you do have one. And then I'm not sure if Spencer or Jasmine, if you guys wanted to field those.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I'll keep an eye on the chat if anybody has questions on the chat as well. But yeah, feel free to unmute your mic and ask Tyler or Erin any questions if you have them.
Hello. I have a small question. Am I audible?
Yes.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yep. So I was wondering, how does rumble strips improves the safety of active mode users on highways? I know it'll improve the safety for like main mode users like cars and trucks, but how would they improve the safety for active mode users? So just if you can throw some light or your experience on that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and something that I did allude to. It's a tricky one because the main purpose, as you mentioned, is to help with vehicle safety and can make sure that cars and trucks aren't drifting off the roadway. But depending on the context, again, they have to be kind of carefully implemented, and we are looking at some pilot locations with the ministry in the CVRD. In particular, where, like I was trying to articulate, you would have rumble strips with then a buffer to a shoulder, so that the cyclists or pedestrians are also kind of keeping clear of them and making sure that bikes don't, have a hazard when if they drift off of them as well. So it's definitely a bit of a push pull on the kind of function of it, but we'll test the kind of test it out in a pilot scenario in particular location and see how that might work. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay, Tyler, I'm going to jump in here.
Sure, Stephen.
As a Cowichan Valley resident, I'm really keen to see development of some kind of active transportation plan. Connecting these very sparse areas. And I was wondering if you could just comment a little bit about the funding side of it and working with MOTI on that piece, because I mean, I'm hoping things have changed, but my experience in dealing with them in the past, I used to work in municipal government, and it's a ministry that's very good at saying no to absolutely everything. And I'm wondering if you maybe can comment on maybe a spirit of change there and support to make some of this happen.
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that's we're still exploring for that particular project as well. But there's a bit of a blessing and a curse with regional districts in that they have the kind of close connection, or can have the close connection with member municipalities within a region, which might have more access to their own funding. Generally, they're quite interested in making sure that their infrastructure is funded within their municipality. And so it's those in-between connections, which again, go back to the ministry. So they're in discussions we've been having with them. It does seem like there maybe is a bit of a change of the guard kind of happening between the way it was done in the past. We've got the development of the Active Transportation Design Guide, which is a provincially kind of developed guide, and so they want to make sure that they're kind of walking the walk as well as talking the talk, and we, slowly starting to see a shift in that. So funding from the ministry, is hopefully headed in that direction now that there's more interest at a provincial level with their grant programs as well. But it's really in these areas we're trying to capture that that kind of maintenance part of it. We want to make sure that it fits into their road building budgets, and the way to do that is to make sure that they're maintainable. So whatever is developed needs to be to a standard that could be serviced by the contracts that they're signed into. But yes, I am hopeful that there is more to be obtained through the ministry.
That's great, thanks. And I'll just let you know, I jumped onto the Cowichan Bay Facebook group and let all the people know about the sessions this weekend so they can get their views in.
Yeah, we'll be out. We're doing 4 public open houses. Here's a shameless plug for us on this project, but yeah, myself and the main project manager, Jason Potter, will be out there in full force and looking to see people coming out to that.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, we have about 13 minutes left in the session if there's any more questions out there.
I see a lot of familiar names here. Let's see if maybe I should pick on somebody. Just kidding. Hannah, did you have any hard questions? You said you were going to have some.
No, unfortunately not. Maybe next time.
Next time, all right.
Tyler gets to find out who's actually listening too. Side. Okay, well, if there's no further questions, going once, going twice, thank you everybody for taking the time to join the interior section today. And thank you very much, Tyler and Erin and Bunton Associates for presenting this talk. It's certainly quite relevant to something we're usually faced with here in our region for sure. So really appreciate the information today, and we'll try to get the PowerPoint out so available for anyone who wants to review it. So Tyler, I'll connect with you on that.
Sure.
Looks like we have Chris. Chris from Bunton Associates, did you have anything you wanted to mention?
Yeah, thank you, Spencer. I actually do have a question. For future events, how do we get on to distribution list? Do you guys have a upcoming event list or like a contact list for the interior section?
Yeah, actually, so our section will be meeting here in the near future because we'll be planning some additional events. So we'll make sure that sounds like Bunt has got a new office in Kelowna there, so we'll make sure that anybody that needs to be on that list for events is on that list for sure.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for attending, and this will be the first of probably many iterations of this presentation. And as we learn more, we'll talk more. So maybe look for a future kind of update on this presentation in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Take care.